Good afternoon, and welcome to today's program titled, Is the Cart Before the Horse? Failure to Launch and Substance Use Disorders. I'm Tom Valentino, Senior Editor of Addiction Professional. Today's program is co-sponsored by Foundations Recovery Network and Decision Point. Thank you to our sponsors and to our audience for giving us your time and attention today. Before we get started, we have a few details we'd like to go over. To submit a question or a technical issue, please use the Q&A area below the slides at any time. You do not have to wait until the end of the program to submit your questions. To download a copy of the presentation, please click the link in the Resources tab to the right of your slides. A special note about CE credit. To get your CE, you must watch the program all the way through the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. At the end, do not leave the web page. The site will automatically redirect you to a survey. This survey must be completed in order to generate your CE certificate. For those watching in a group, please download the group submission guide in the Resources tab and follow the instructions provided. Please note CE credit is not available for the archived webinar. It is only available for the live event. Finally, for those of you who tweet, please tweet along with us using our hashtag today, APLiveWebinar. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Gary Hees. Gary received his master's degree from the University of Houston Clear Lake in marriage and family therapy. He has been licensed in Texas and now in Arizona for 15 years. During that time, he has worked with adolescents, adult co-occurring disordered clients in hospitals, a partial hospital program and outpatient therapy, and in private therapeutic boarding school. Thank you, Gary, for taking the time to speak with us today. And with that, the audience is yours.
Hi, everyone. Gary, I think you may be on mute.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. The first slide that you see in front of you is the iconic painting, The Man on the Bed, used in AA and in AA fellowships. For a long time, AA has had the reputation, and treatment has had the reputation of being this hardcore, in-your-face, confrontational process that people go through. What I wanted to do with this first slide is indicate to those of us who work in the treatment industry that perhaps we should reconsider that position. When a person goes into treatment, they're really lost. They do need some direction, but we all know that collaborative direction is much more effective than simply telling people what to do or what they haven't done right in their life. And The Man on the Bed, the painting, illustrates exactly that point, that the intent behind the big book in AA has always been collaboration and helpfulness. And the truth is, as illustrated by this cartoon with one of my favorite cartoon characters, Pogo, actually we have met the enemy, and he is us. That the treatment industry has treated people shabbily throughout the process, and that really a clinical approach and a collaborative effort with them is what not only what is called for, but also what will be effective. So we have to ask ourselves, as the title says, is the cart before the horse? How is it that we need to approach these types of issues? And believe me, later in the presentation, I'll show you how a clinical approach can not only be effective, but also can be profitable for your private practice or your practice in a treatment center. So, the paradigm that we begin to look at is one of the client, the concept, the theoretical lenses through which we will actually consider treatment, how we implement it, and then how we verify treatment and verify the results in an objective manner. So, our client who's out in front of us very often has these characteristics. And while we cannot measure sobriety in an objective, quantitative manner, we can look at these characteristics and whether or not they change in that way. So most of the time, and I'm not very good at reading slides to people, but I want to emphasize on this, that parenting styles and family of origin play a part, that relationships are often very dysfunctional, that there is a huge lack of development of identity in terms of Erik Erikson stages of development, that there's very simplistic moral, ethical reasoning, and always some degree of severity of substance use disorder, utilizing those definitions within the DSM-5 that substance abuse is a matter of appearing on a continuity rather than being a you are or you aren't issue. So while there aren't any objective measures, we can look at and measure the characteristics of those who are addicted, and changing those characteristics can be objectively measured. So the concept that we deal with is basically one of development, going through a process of natural growth or differentiation with a trusted counselor or guide. And I'm going to emphasize this later, and I think you'll see that the point is well taken, that treatment is actually a contrived developmental crisis. In terms of individual development, our goals have to be to establish functional relationships, to move toward self-centered development, and develop an internal locus of control, to create and adhere to an internal value system, to work those issues that have exacerbated the substance use disorder, and develop positive character traits. So in doing those things, what we're able to do is prepare that individual to then participate within family development, restoring the balance within the family, getting parents and other important family members and family system members on the same page in dealing with each other. Mostly preparing and creating partnership parenting, because as we'll see, parenting style and the approach to parenting is absolutely vital to the development of identity. Moving forward, also, character development will be counting. We need to develop an internal framework of moral principles. Most of the time, when a person comes into treatment and they are working on a substance use disorder and their life has come apart, their level of moral reasoning, at least as we observe it here at Decision Point, and as I've observed it throughout my career, is they are functioning on the simplest level of moral reasoning. That is, I do or I don't do, so I will not get in trouble. There's actually an enrichment of life that occurs when that moral reasoning moves up on Kohlberg's chain of moral reasoning. So, the theoretical lenses that we will look through. First and foremost, Erikson's stages of development. We're all fairly familiar with these, but most important in this case, especially with failure to launch young adults, is the lack of development of ego identity. Specifically, we can look beyond Erikson and look at ego identity and role confusion that it is developing a sense of self, a personal identity, an internal system of values, and further, we can look to yet another source that many of us haven't looked at, James E. Marsh's work on ego identity. What Erickson posited to us was that ego identity would be either diffuse or achieve. It would be an either-or process. James Marsh's work on ego identity expanded that and gave us 4 different definitions. Diffuse, with no exploration and no commitment. Achieved, a commitment following a period of exploration. Foreclosed, and maybe the best way for me to illustrate this is imagine a family conversation going on at the dinner table one night where one of the parents says, your grandparent was a doctor, I'm a doctor, and you're going to be a doctor. In other words, commitment to a direction following no exploration at all. The truth is, where we want to go with young adults, failure to launch young adults in treatment, is toward moratorium in a period of exploration where they do not commit without exploring, and where exploration is perceived as lots of different options that they could pursue rather than simply one. Central are exploration and commitment. Empirical studies tell us that there is greater individuation after a crisis period or exploration. They tell us that an external locus of control is associated with depression, but an internal locus of control is associated with developed identity and higher levels of moral reasoning. Greater personality differentiation in terms of relationships with others occurs after a crisis or period of exploration. So, with a substance user, what very often is the achieved identity, and I say that ironically, that they exhibit? They are underfunctioning, forcing those around them to be overfunctioning. They are extremely manipulative. There is an internal locus of control, which is their ability to use. But functionally, there is an external locus of control that's dictated by the approval of other substance users or addicts. By focusing on approval from that group, these young adults continuously reinforce their negative cognitions of self that they wish to actually avoid, sometimes by using. And again, their relationships are going to be characterized by using and being used. In short, the less developed the self, the greater the impact of others, and the more vulnerable they become to substance use disorders and addiction. Functioning on other esteem, on an external locus of control based on the approval of others, and responding to relationship pressure, not thoughtful choice. I'd like you to take a look at this excerpt from the Bowen Center. I'll give you a little time here to read through that. A little over halfway through, I do want to read this part. The basic building blocks of a self are inborn, but an individual's family relationships during childhood and adolescence primarily determine how much self he develops. Once established, the level of self rarely changes unless the person makes a structured and long-term effort to change it. In short, what I'm saying, again, is that treatment is a contrived developmental crisis. It is a period of time where we have the opportunity to therapeutically steer a young adult toward the development of identity, toward therefore developing higher levels of moral reasoning, toward actually examining and utilizing positive relationships within our treatment milieu, and in short, creating an atmosphere for them that is based on honesty and on integrity, as opposed to the usual rules of operating within relationship with other substance use disordered people. In terms of relationships, we have to get the parents to stop cross-generational alliances and to move away from conflicting parenting styles. In terms of a partner, we need them to feel complete within themselves rather than relating to their partner in an anxious or avoidant manner. And finally, in terms of friends, we literally need to change the paradigm where they seek out those people who will be honest with them rather than those people who will approve of them because they are willing to agree. Now, let's talk a second about parenting styles. For those of you unfamiliar with parenting styles, go and Google Diana Baumrind, Baumrind, 1969. She wrote her thesis at that point and defined 3 different parenting styles that still stay with us and are relevant today. An authoritarian style, characterized by overt exercise of power and laying down absolutes. A permissive parenting style that is indulgent and manipulates. And an authoritative parenting style which turns out to be very functional and actually facilitate development of identity. In terms of authoritarian, think of the parent who's not home very often, but when they come home, looks up and says, "My way or the highway." In terms of permissive parenting, think of a parent within the home who literally looks up and says, "No, you can't do that. No, I've told you no. Oh, go ahead and do what you want." Those are overgeneralized examples of what those 2 parenting styles do. In research, most parents of an addict or a substance abuser, one will illustrate an authoritarian parenting style and the other a permissive parenting style. And that conflict actually doesn't really prohibit, but it greatly negatively impacts the development of ego identity, as you can see from this quotation from Grunman's research. So in working with families, we all know that family work is important, but now we know objectively, qualitatively, why it's important, why we need to get parents on the same page and parenting from an authoritative stance. Sandrock's work in 2004, as you can see, directly speaks to how parenting styles influence the achievement of identity in adolescence. In terms of relationships, I've really talked over some of these before, but a reminder is always good. In terms of moral reasoning, I spoke earlier telling you that most of the people who come in that I see are at Kohlberg's lowest level of moral reasoning. I do or don't do, so I won't be punished. This is very self-centered and self-directed. In essence, this is avoiding life rather than experiencing life. As you can see here, Roe and Marcia, back in 1979, drew the connection between Kohlberg's level of moral development and ego identity status. From a family systems perspective, we of course have to consider multi-generationalism. That is, how family relationship and family functioning actually will deteriorate in dysfunctional families over the generations. I believe that structural views and interventions are by far the most effective, and that most of the work is going to be done in how the family patterns its communication. So, just to make sure that there's a complicated diagram talking about all this, here's a diagram basically telling us how all of these pieces respond to each other and how they relate. Now, in terms of substance use disorders, thank God the DSM-5 came out and defined substance use disorders as being on a continuum, mild, moderate, and severe. They gave us these 11 criteria and simply told us, when you question the incoming individual and you're assessing, 2 to 3 symptoms indicate a mild disorder, 4 to 5 indicate a moderate substance use disorder, and 6 or more give us a severe substance use disorder. And dealing with it in this way, number one, not only makes sense, it makes sense to the client. The old saw within treatment programs that anyone is an addict and they're all the same simply doesn't hold true. The junior in college at Arizona State University, whose grade point average has dropped by an entire grade point over the last semester because he is binge drinking every single Saturday and Sunday, is different from the individual living in an empty cardboard box on a vacant lot in Scottsdale who is using heroin. We have to take that into account, and the approaches are different based on severity. Plus, we have to take into account multiple other factors, such as trauma, such as executive functioning or the lack thereof, such as mental illness. As Gabor Mate told us, the research clearly shows that the biggest driver of addictive relapse and addictive behavior is actually stress. If we don't identify these stressors, we're simply putting people in a van, sending them to a meeting twice a day, and penalizing them for having not taken their garbage out. We're actually not addressing what drives the essential condition of utilizing a substance use disorder in order to cope with life. So, how can we go about implementing a program to do that? I'm going to suggest to you that there are 8 guiding principles. Provide a medical detox staffed by medical personnel. Do a thorough assessment and evaluation, one that looks at nutrition, that looks at career and educational counseling, that includes multiple salient psychological instruments, a full psychiatric evaluation, and a gathering of all of that data into a definite summary fueled by a clinical interview by a PhD psychologist that guides the treatment plan for the individual. Be respectful, firm, and empowering. Model integrity by having the same rules apply to both clients and staff. And by the way, don't get stuck on 12-step. I personally am in recovery within the 12-step program of AA. It has really worked for me, but it doesn't work for everyone. So, give the options to do things like smart recovery or celebrate recovery. What's important, the research tells us, is social support, peer support, not that it be of a certain kind. Include friends and family in the treatment process, and believe it or not, maintain clinical excellence, not just for the client, but also to facilitate your own insurance reimbursement. In terms of detox, assess, assess, assess. Deal with the medical conditions. Be prepared to deal with any medical condition. In terms of assessment, a psychiatric evaluation for Axis 1 and 2 disorders. This is a full and detailed psychiatric assessment. The personality assessment inventory done by a PhD psychologist in order to assess for Axis 1 and 2 disorders. The Rotter incomplete sentence blank to provide a projective look into what's going on with the client as well as where they stand in terms of locus of control. The wide-ranging achievement test version 4 to tell us where is this person and what are their capabilities in order to feed information into a full career and educational counseling assessment. In terms of trauma, utilize the CAPS 5, the gold standard, if you will, for evaluating trauma. And finally, look at the brief rating of executive functioning, the adult version. I cannot tell you, we have had multiple times that a client has come to us with a history of difficulty in treatment, been classified as treatment resistant, and by evaluating for executive functioning, we found out that they weren't simply stubborn and treatment resistant. More often, we found a learning disability or even that the client was actually on the Asperger's end of the autism spectrum. The clinical interview has to be done by the PhD psychologist to tie together all of the testing data. A family assessment, including a genogram, needs to be done during that psychological assessment as well. Nutrition plays a part in this, as does career and educational assessment. I don't know about you guys, but when I came in and got sober a little over 27 years ago, if someone had looked at me and said, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to 3 meetings a day and you're going to work at Burger King, I don't believe I would have had very much incentive and motivation. Sobriety is achieved in order to facilitate the individual having a life. That is very, very clear from the first 164 pages of the Big Book. So, giving someone hope and a direction for their life becomes an integral part of treatment. The way to do that assessment and evaluation is to concentrate on it for 2 weeks to 15 days. Establish where the person is on the continuum of substance use disorders and involve them in the decision of whether or not they need to stay for residential treatment. Indeed, many times when we assess someone to have a mild substance use disorder, we recommend that they simply return to IOP, sign the appropriate ROIs for us so we can share the results of assessment and evaluation with them in order to guide the treatment they go into. If they decide to stay, we do a 45-day residential program, 30 days past that initial assessment and evaluation. and we do all of what we point out here. I suggest that you do all the same. In addition, we look to expand but not limit those peer support groups. So our staff are trained in facilitating smart recovery. We have Celebrate Recovery in local churches. And of course, Prescott is a mecca for AA and NA recovery. You don't have to look at this as an either or between clinical approaches in dealing with the client or them simply recovering through a peer support program. They actually work hand in hand because support groups are about the following: development, knowing who you are, that embarrassing phase of growing up in public, healing relationships and learning to treat others well and demand the same for yourself, utilizing higher moral reasoning and making a spiritual connection of your own choice, doing, in fact, the next right thing. So, if we have someone who wants to stay for a longer period of time, we'll let them expand for another 45 days. We'll support them and do the things that you see here on the page. But I wouldn't want to go much past a 90-day period of time because the object here is to return the person in a functional manner to normal life. Within your milieu, I highly recommend that you train your staff to the SAMHSA standards of a therapeutic community. It has worked out extremely well for us. It has been received extremely well. And those characteristic conflicts around rules and conflicts between residential staff and clients have literally reduced to a very manageable level for us since implementing the concept of the SAMHSA Therapeutic Community. By the way, the training for the community, the facilitator's manual, as well as the training manuals, are available free online. Some of the basic precepts of using the therapeutic model are those that you see here on the screen. Most of all, it's holding staff and clients accountable to the same level of mutual respect and mutual tolerance. We do an outdoor program. We find it very, very useful. It gets people out into the outdoors. It changes their experience of treatment, and it gives them a break, if you will, from what can be a day-to-day difficult grind that they experience within treatment. We encourage them going out to community support groups, and we, in fact, facilitate them going to multiple different kinds of support groups as well. In terms of therapy, we want to understand the developmental deficits on the part of the individual client. We want to help them develop identity, internal locus of control, and actually begin to build functional relationships with their family where they view each other as allies rather than enemies. Again, for clients and parents and siblings, there are very specific goals. And for us, we have on staff a specific family therapist who does this work with the families for the purposes of continuity. The mission of the primary therapist is to execute and achieve the goals contained within the master treatment plan for the individual client. Now, what's the business payoff by being this clinically oriented? What you're seeing on the screen is actual data for us. We are strictly out of network, yet we average receiving 28 days of residential treatment for the client, followed by averaging 21 days of partial hospitalization treatment after the 28 days of residential. The advantages are obvious. One, we're doing an actual clinical job with the client when they're with us. And the insurers and providers and payees know that because of the quality of the documentation and the thoroughness of the assessment and evaluation. The second big benefit is when the client returns home, in many cases they return home with their IOP benefits intact, where they can continue extended treatment that we know is very valuable to have. How can we verify it? Lots of us know our facilities are Joint Commission accredited. The Joint Commission has come out and actually set down and is adopting for the near future a requirement that outcome measurement be done if you're going to be Joint Commission accredited. So, what can you do? The easy way to go about this is to take two of the measures that you do during assessment and evaluation that have good, dependable test-retest reliability and give them near the end of treatment and simply compare the scores and the outcomes from when the client came in to when the client leaves. Our choice is to do the personality assessment inventory again and directly measure the reduction in pathology. Also, since a very high percentage of our clients come in with trauma as part of their background, we will be giving the CAPS-5 and measure the reduction in PTSD symptomology. By the way, our treatment of choice for addressing trauma is EMDR, and we employ an EMDRIA consultant who trains people in EMDR to actually do EMDR with our clients. So, what might the protocol look like? The protocol for us is the following. The two instruments, actually there are multiple instruments administered during assessment, but the two that we use for verification are administered during that assessment period of the residential program. They're administered again after completion of the 45-day program. If a client extends to another 45 days, we will give those two instruments near the end of the extended 45-day period as well. We compare the changes from one administration to another, and the correlations are examined between the instruments. What this lets us do is actually objectively measure whether or not our program has been successful, rather than depending on a type of self-report instrument that says, do you feel better now than when you came in? And we believe that that's much better, much more accurate measurement. So in brief, we looked at the client and their characteristics, the concept of treatment becoming a contrived developmental crisis. We looked at the concepts of ego identity, levels of moral reasoning, locus of control, family dynamics, all as things which actually affect and influence the development and continuance of a substance use disorder. We talked over how to implement those things, and indeed how to do verification that leads to continuous feedback and improvement of the program, which, by the way, if you are Joint Commission accredited, that's known as QMPI and PIP, the performance improvement measures that you are to be doing on a continuous basis. The next slide is simply a reference slide to give you some of the articles that I utilized in putting together the presentation. These should be available to you. I encourage you to read the source materials and especially look at Marcia's work on ego identity. This last slide is simply contact information for me, and I'd be happy to talk with you or email with you if you'd like to discuss the concept anymore. So at this point, I'm really, that would be the slides. And I thank you all sincerely for your attention. And I hope this has given you helpful ideas for treatment in your private practice or in the organization that you may be a part of now.
All right. Thank you, Gary. That was a very informative presentation. I'd like to remind everybody that you can submit questions in the Q&A area below the slides. Before we get to our Q&A, I would like to hand it over to Sarah from Foundations for a few words from our sponsor.
Here at Foundations Recovery Network, our grassroots movement called Heroes in Recovery has a simple mission: to eliminate the social stigma that keeps addicted individuals from seeking help, to share stories of recovery for the purpose of encouragement and inspiration, and to create an engaged, sober community that empowers people to get involved, give back, and live healthy, active lives. Join us in this mission at our 6K race series at these locations across the country. As a thank you for your attendance today, please enjoy the discount code Webinar 2017 to register for any future 6K events. Back to you, Tom.
All right, thanks a lot, Sarah. Let's go ahead and get into the Q&A portion of today's program. All right, let's see here. First question we have: do you have any advice on working with antisocial personality disorder or APD prodromes once it is indicated on your assessment?
Oh, gosh. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Like any of the personality disorders, boundaries are what you're going to have to work with. But you're also going to have to be constantly aware of the fact that if you actually have a diagnosed antisocial personality disorder, that you're dealing with someone for whom empathy is a foreign concept. They do not empathize. They do not put themselves in other people's shoes. The most successful approaches we have had with people like that are not to go with them about advice anyway derived from the golden rule, but rather from, if you behave in the following ways, it will be advantageous to you in the following. In other words, showing them the advantage of simply behaving in a certain way. So when I'm dealing with that, I'm not really looking at deep spirituality or a spiritual awakening, if you will. I'm looking for a behavior, and the best way to sell behavior in that case is to sell how it would be advantageous to the individual.
All right. Gary, can you tell us a little bit about the structure of your program? How much is allocated for group therapy and how much for individual sessions, i.e. doing trauma work?
Oh, gosh. Number one, primary group takes place every day. Each day, all clients are participating in 3 different groups on the clinical side. We also are offering groups that deal with education and career counseling, that deal with anger management. We do a group that we call Brotherhood for the men. We do a group that we call Sisterhood for the women. We find that that's very, very useful because both of those groups are focused on finding life purpose and meaning in life and deriving a purpose from knowing who you are. On average, believe it or not, guys, between case management, seeing the primary counselor, seeing the nutritionist, seeing the EMDR therapist, and seeing the career counselor, our clients are averaging 5 individual sessions per week in addition to all of the groups that they do. So it's an intensive clinical program. EMDR, very proud of the fact that we've taken it beyond where it is. We actually do what is called GTEP, a group traumatic events protocol, which is a group process that was utilized by Alon Shapiro, most notably in refugee camps in the Middle East. That we do that group protocol in the first 2 weeks with every client who comes with us. And basically we focus that on their personally held guilt and shame that comes from the way they behaved while they were out during the addictive episode. So hopefully that gives people a good idea. If you want more detail, feel free to email me.
All right. Do you limit the amount of time spent on social media, phones, and the internet? And if so, how is this monitored?
Oh, gosh. Number one, we have a computer lab that is available to all of our people. It is restricted by our IT people toward useful websites. We do restrict access to phones in that we have specified times where the client can be on the phone. We look at and process with them the people who they speak to, as well as controlling access on our campus very, very strictly. What we're looking for is to deal with these people like adults. If we take all of that away, you really come down to 2 different treatment choices. You can give them controlled, limited access to those things because those things are part of average life. Or you can approach treatment the way it's always been approached. I'm not going to let you get on the phone. I won't let you be on the computer. And I'll tell you that that is about you focusing on treatment. Yet, when the person leaves treatment, they will be on those things as well. My choice within designing our program here has been to give them limited monitored access, and I would rather deal with the issues that come up around those things here in treatment than hear about a client relapsing when they got deep into them after leaving a treatment episode that essentially was artificial because of everything I limited them being able to do.
All right, time for some more questions here, but if you would like to submit a question, you've still got time to do so. Next question that we had coming in. When you're working with people to give them purpose and to not have them go to group 3 times a week and get a job at Burger King, what do you do for those who have felony records and are disqualified from many jobs?
I understand. Number one, we have a specific job educational counselor. That's his training, and he's used to dealing with that issue. Number two, we have them counsel with 2 of our members of our staff who actually have felony records and have been in recovery for a long period of time. Number 3, we find there is less restriction on jobs than you would think when you are connected with a specific job counselor. 4, we've actually been approached by another individual who does some contract work with us, who has a felony record, about implementing a program here where we support felons who are in recovery who come out of prison and reconnect. So we expect to learn more about that in the future. If you work with a specific career educational counselor who knows that issue, you would be surprised how many different ways you can go with that. It's much less restrictive than you would immediately think.
Okay. Next question. Besides group traumatic events protocol, what interventions appear to work best to reduce PTSD symptoms?
One-on-one EMDR. We do cognitive therapy on trauma, but by far, I've been trained in post-induction therapy from PMLD, cognitive trauma therapy, and I'm a level 2 practitioner in EMDR. By far, the most effective methodology that I've seen is EMDR, but I do have to say this. If you contract that work, be careful about who you employ. Our practitioner is extremely good and very accomplished because she is an MTRIA consultant and because of the time and effort she's put into it. No therapeutic modality is going to be good when practiced by a practitioner who's not very good at doing it. So you really have to interview strenuously and even get references of people that the individuals work from before you count on them to do effective work with your clientele.
Okay. Harry, acknowledging that abstinence is not the sole determinant of a healthy recovery, how would a return to substance use during treatment or post-treatment be managed?
I can tell you from dealing with a number of people who have gone back out. Number one, you have to be understanding of it. Believe me, if you sit down and you do in-depth interviews, and we do, with people who come back after a relapse experience, there is nothing that you can tell them that is going to make them be harder on themselves than they've already been. It is a devastating experience for an individual. In truth, would I like all of our clients to be abstinent? I'd love for that to happen. I'd absolutely love for that to happen. But realistically, the research shows us that it doesn't. So the real goal within our treatment program is to help people have lots of tools to be abstinent, but mostly develop a sense of themselves, develop a purpose in life, and utilizing those two things, develop resilience. So if they do have a relapse experience, their first response isn't, screw it, I might as well just do this upright. And instead is, oh my God, I'm not sure what happened, but I know I need to go get help.
Okay. Next comment, actually, it's not a question from one of our listeners. It said, just a comment, glad you may have the funding to offer your clients all that you're suggesting, not the funding that this person has where they are, which actually leads me to a question for you, Gary.
Sure.
In a situation where funding might be difficult to come by, do you have any advice for professionals who are in that boat and what they might be able to do to incorporate some of what you've been discussing today?
Oh, man. I worked in a not-for-profit community mental health setting, and I hope this doesn't sound too self-grandizing, but I wrote grants for them, and we did very well in being able to get the grant money. it really pays for you to have good grant money coming in, especially if you're not a not-for-profit environment. To do that, you've got to have someone who is clinically oriented and can write that grant for you, utilizing research that's looked at by the payors of the grant. For instance, if you go after federal money, utilize, cite, and quote why you want to do what you do with that grant money based on SAMHSA research into the type of program that you're going to prepare. If it's state grant money, do the very same thing on a state level. It will make you more successful in doing that. Some of these things, such as developing meaning of life, can be done on an individual basis with the person. It can be done within the context of individual therapy. I've written some exercises that do some of those things, and I'd be happy to share them if someone wants to email me and ask.
Alrighty, I think that's going to be just about all the time we have for questions for today. We have some final instructions regarding CE credit. Please do not leave this page. Please continue to stay on the platform, as the site's going to automatically redirect you to a survey, and this survey must be completed in order to generate your CE certificate. For those watching in a group, as a reminder, please download the group submission guide in the resources tab to the right of the slides and follow the instructions provided. Please note that CE credit is not available for the archived webinar. It is only available for the live event here today on May 31st, 2017. I want to thank Gary Hees once again for an excellent presentation. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Foundations Recovery Network and Decision Point, for making today's program possible. Finally, a big thank you to those of you in our audience for participating today. We hope you'll join us in the future for another Addiction Professional webinar. This concludes today's presentation. Have a great day.